My sister created a fake dating profile using my photos, and the first guy who matched with her recognized me immediately. He didn't just swipe past or report the profile. Instead, he showed up at my apartment at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, holding his phone with screenshots of conversations he'd been having with someone pretending to be me for 3 weeks. Someone who knew intimate details about my life, my job, my favorite coffee shop, and even my childhood pet's name. Someone who had been planning to meet him for dinner the next evening. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That someone was my own sister, Rachel, but let me start from the beginning, because the warning signs were there all along. I just never thought to connect them until it was too late. My name is Brooklyn Sinclair, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a graphic designer for a tech startup in Austin, Texas, and I live in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in the trendy South Lamar district. My life had been pretty predictable until recently. I'd wake up, grab coffee from the same corner cafe, work on branding projects for various apps and websites, come home to my rescue dog Winston, and spend evenings either reading or video calling my family back in Phoenix. Rachel is my younger sister by 4 years. She moved to Austin 6 months ago after what she called a career pivot, from working at our dad's insurance agency to pursuing social media marketing. She claimed she wanted to be closer to me and experience big city life, but I suspected she was running from something back home. Rachel had always been the dramatic one in our family, the one who turned minor inconveniences into major crises, who somehow made every family gathering revolve around her latest relationship disaster or career upheaval. Growing up, Rachel and I had a complicated relationship. She was the pretty one, the outgoing one, the one who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. I was quieter, more studious, always standing slightly in her shadow at family events. Our parents, Linda and Robert Sinclair, tried their best to treat us equally, but Rachel had a way of demanding more attention, more support, more everything. When she decided to move to Austin, I was genuinely excited about the chance to rebuild our sisterly bond as adults. I helped her find her current apartment, which is only a 15-minute drive from mine in the East Side district. It's a small studio above a vintage clothing store, the kind of place that looks charming on Instagram but lacks basic amenities like reliable air conditioning and adequate storage. Rachel seemed to love it, though, especially because it fit her aesthetic vision of being a creative, independent woman in a hip neighborhood. In those first few months after her arrival, we fell into a routine of meeting for brunch every Sunday at Magnolia Cafe, a local institution known for its quirky decor and massive pancakes. Rachel would update me on her job search, her dating adventures, and her adjustment to city life. She seemed to be thriving, posting constantly on social media about her new favorite restaurants, her yoga classes, her networking events. Her Instagram feed looked like a curated guide to the coolest spots in Austin, but there were things that didn't quite add up. Rachel claimed to be freelancing for various local businesses, helping them with their social media presence, but she was always vague about specifics. When I asked about her clients or offered to refer some of my professional contacts, she would deflect with comments about non-disclosure agreements or say she was still in the early stages of building relationships. She seemed to have plenty of money for someone who was supposedly building a freelance business from scratch, always suggesting expensive restaurants for our dinners, buying new clothes, taking weekend trips to nearby cities. She also seemed to know a lot about my daily routine, more than I remembered sharing with her. She'd text me asking how my meeting with a particular client went, referencing projects I'd only mentioned in passing. She knew when I had doctor appointments, when I was dealing with difficult neighbors, when Winston had been sick. At the time, I attributed it to sisterly interest and the fact that we were talking more frequently than we had in years. Rachel's dating life was another source of confusion. She talked constantly about the guys she was meeting through dating apps, describing elaborate conversations and potential relationships, but I never actually met any of these men. When I suggested she bring someone to our Sunday brunches or to a double date with me and whatever guy I was seeing at the time, she always had excuses. They were too busy, too shy, not ready for that step, still getting to know each other. Looking back, I realized she was describing my conversations, my potential relationships, my dating experiences. The photography thing should have been the biggest red flag. Rachel had suddenly developed an intense interest in taking pictures of me. Every time we hung out, she'd insist on capturing candid moments with her phone. She'd snap photos of me at restaurants, during our walks around the neighborhood, while I was petting Winston at the dog park. She claimed she was practicing her photography skills and that I was her favorite subject because I was naturally photogenic. She'd take dozens of shots from different angles, always asking me to look more relaxed, more natural, more approachable. Pretend you're talking to someone you really like, she'd say, or give me that smile you do when you're genuinely happy. I thought she was just being artistic, maybe building a portfolio for her social media work.
Rachel also started asking strange questions about my preferences and opinions. During our conversations, she'd probe about what I found attractive in men, what my deal breakers were in relationships, what kind of date I'd consider perfect. She wanted to know about my past relationships in detail, not just the basic facts, but my emotional responses, what had gone wrong, what I'd learned from each experience. "I'm trying to figure out my own patterns," she'd explain when I asked why she was so curious. "You've always been better at relationships than me, Brooke. I want to understand what I'm doing wrong." This seemed plausible at the time. Rachel had a history of intense, short-lived relationships that ended badly. She'd fall hard and fast for men who seemed exciting, but turned out to be unreliable or emotionally unavailable. I wanted to help her break that cycle, so I shared more than I probably should have about my own romantic experiences, my hopes for future relationships, my insecurities and fears. She also started showing up at places where I regularly spent time. If I mentioned grabbing coffee at my usual spot, she'd text later saying she'd stopped by and just missed me. She'd happened to be at the grocery store I frequented, the bookstore where I liked to browse on weekends, the park where I walked Winston every morning. Austin is a big city, but we seemed to be crossing paths constantly in ways that felt coincidental, but were actually quite unlikely. The most unsettling part was how she'd reference conversations and activities that I didn't remember having with her. She'd thank me for advice I didn't recall giving, or mention plans we'd supposedly made that weren't in my calendar. When I'd look confused, she'd laugh it off and say I was getting forgetful or distracted by work stress. Rachel also became very interested in my professional life, asking detailed questions about my clients, my projects, my daily schedule. She wanted to know about my coworkers, my office culture, my career goals. She'd ask to see my portfolio, my business cards, my LinkedIn profile. She claimed she was trying to understand the creative industry better so she could position herself more effectively in her own marketing work. All of these behaviors individually seemed like normal sisterly interest or even admirable qualities. Rachel was being supportive, engaged, curious about my life. She was making an effort to connect with me and understand my world. After years of feeling distant from each other, I was happy to have a sister who seemed genuinely interested in being close. But collectively, these behaviors were creating a detailed map of my entire existence. The night everything unraveled was a Saturday in mid-October. Austin was experiencing one of those perfect fall evenings, warm enough for a t-shirt, but with a cool breeze that made you want to walk around the neighborhood and enjoy being outside. I'd spent the day working on a rebranding project for a local restaurant, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening at home with Winston and a good book. Around 9 o'clock, just as I was settling into my couch with a cup of tea, there was a knock at my door. This was unusual because my building has a security system. Visitors have to be buzzed up through the lobby intercom. I assumed it was a neighbor or maybe a delivery driver who'd gotten into the building somehow. When I opened the door, I found a tall, dark-haired man I'd never seen before standing in my hallway. He was probably around 30, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, holding his phone in his hand like he was about to show me something important. He looked nervous but determined, the way people look when they're about to have a difficult conversation they've been rehearsing in their head. "Are you Rachel Sinclair?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. keeping the chain lock engaged and only opening the door a few inches. Can I help you? My name's Nathan Cross. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think we need to talk. Someone has been using your photos on a dating app, and they've been pretending to be you for weeks. My first thought was that this was some kind of scam or mistake. Online dating horror stories were common, and catfishing was something you heard about happening to other people, not something that affected your real life in such a direct way. I'm sorry, but I think you might have the wrong person, I said, starting to close the door. Wait, Nathan said quickly. The person I've been talking to told me she's a graphic designer who works for a tech startup in South Lamar. She has a rescue dog named Winston. She grew up in Phoenix and has a younger sister who just moved to Austin. She gets her coffee every morning from a place called Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road. I stopped closing the door. Every detail he'd mentioned was accurate. Radio Coffee was indeed where I got my morning coffee. Winston was my rescue dog. My sister had recently moved to Austin. I did work as a graphic designer for a tech startup in the South Lamar area. Our office was in the South Lamar area. How do you know all that? I asked. Nathan held up his phone. Because for the past 3 weeks, I've been talking to someone on Bumble who claims to be you. We've had long conversations about your job, your family, your dog, your favorite places in the city. We were supposed to meet for dinner tomorrow night at Uchi.
Uchi was one of my favorite restaurants in Austin, a high-end sushi place that I'd mentioned wanting to try again recently. But I wasn't on Bumble, and I definitely hadn't been planning to meet anyone for dinner. That's impossible, I said. I'm not on any dating apps right now. Nathan's expression became more serious. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Can I show you something? I promise I'm not trying to scam you or hurt you. I just think someone is using your identity, and you deserve to know about it. Against my better judgment, I undid the chain lock and opened the door wider. Nathan seemed genuine, and frankly, I was too curious about what he might show me to send him away without seeing his evidence. He pulled up his phone and showed me a Bumble profile. The photos were definitely of me, recent photos that I recognized from various occasions over the past few months. There was the picture Rachel had taken of me at Magnolia Cafe during one of our Sunday brunches, the one where I was laughing at something she'd said about our childhood. There was another photo from our trip to Zilker Park, where she'd insisted on taking several shots of me playing with Winston near the dog fountain. The profile name was Brooklyn S., age 28, and the bio read, graphic designer with a passion for good coffee and great conversations, new to the Austin dating scene and looking for someone who appreciates creativity and authenticity. Love exploring the city with my rescue pup and trying new restaurants. Family-oriented but independent. Let's grab dinner and see where the conversation takes us. The bio was well written, capturing my personality in a way that felt accurate, but also optimized for online dating success. It mentioned specific details about my life while presenting them in an appealing, approachable way. Someone had put thought into crafting this version of me. When did you match with this profile? I asked. 3 weeks ago, Nathan said. We've been texting almost every day since then. She, or whoever this person is, has been really engaging. We've talked about everything from work stress to family dynamics to what we're looking for in a relationship. I was actually excited about meeting her tomorrow because our conversations felt so natural and genuine. He scrolled through their text conversation, showing me messages that made my stomach drop. The person pretending to be me had shared stories about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, my experiences living in Austin. They had discussed my job in detail, describing projects I was working on and challenges I'd mentioned to only a few close people. They had even sent additional photos that I recognize as ones Rachel had taken during our recent outings together. Did she ever mention her sister Rachel? I asked, dreading the answer. Yeah, actually. She talked about her sister Rachel quite a bit, said Rachel had just moved to town and that they were getting closer than they'd been when they were younger. She mentioned that Rachel was helping her navigate the dating scene, giving her advice about putting herself out there more. The irony was staggering. My sister had been using our real relationship as part of her fictional persona, making herself a supporting character in her own deception. This is insane, I said, more to myself than to Nathan. I can't believe someone would do this. Do you have any idea who might be responsible? Someone who has access to your photos and knows this much about your personal life? I knew the answer, but I didn't want to say it out loud. The evidence was overwhelming, but accepting it meant acknowledging that my sister, the person I'd been working so hard to build a better relationship with, had been systematically stealing my identity for weeks. I think I know who's doing this, I said quietly, but I need to confirm it before I can do anything about it. Nathan nodded understandingly. What can I do to help? I feel terrible that I've been part of this without knowing it. I really thought I was getting to know you, and now I find out I've been talking to some stranger who's been lying about everything. You couldn't have known, I assured him. This isn't your fault, but I do need to ask you to do something. Don't let this person know that you've contacted me. If you're supposed to meet tomorrow, maybe go through with it, but don't mention this conversation. I want to see what happens when they don't show up. Are you sure that's safe? What if this person is dangerous? I don't think they're physically dangerous, I said, though I was realizing I didn't really know what my sister was capable of. I just need to understand the full scope of what's been happening before I confront them. We exchanged contact information, and Nathan promised to update me after the planned meeting. As he walked back down the hallway toward the elevator, I closed my door and leaned against it, trying to process what I'd just learned. My sister had been impersonating me online, using my photos to attract men on dating apps, having conversations with them while pretending to be me, and making plans to meet them in person. She'd been doing this for at least 3 weeks, possibly longer, and she had been using information from our private conversations to make her deception more convincing.
The violation felt profound and personal in a way I'd never experienced before. Rachel hadn't just stolen my photos or my basic information. She'd stolen my voice, my personality, my relationships. She'd been living as me in a parallel digital world, making connections and promises that I'd never agreed to. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those photos of myself on Nathan's phone, displayed on a dating profile I'd never created, attached to conversations I'd never had. My mind raced through the implications of what Rachel had been doing, trying to understand not just the how, but the why. At 3 a.m, I finally gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. If Rachel was using my photos on Bumble, she might be using them on other platforms too. I spent the next 2 hours doing reverse image searches on pictures of myself, starting with the ones I'd seen on Nathan's phone and expanding to others I could remember Rachel taking recently. The results were worse than I'd feared. I found myself on Tinder with the name Brooke S. and a slightly different bio that emphasized my love of outdoor activities and craft beer. Interests I'd mentioned to Rachel, but that weren't really central to my personality. The photos were a mix of ones she'd taken and others I recognized from my own social media accounts, though these were older posts from before I'd made my profiles more private. On Hinge, I discovered Brooklyn Sinclair with my actual full name, featuring more professional-looking photos that Rachel had somehow obtained. The bio on this profile was the most sophisticated, mentioning my specific job title, my college alma mater, and even my volunteer work with a local animal rescue, information that would be hard for a stranger to fake convincingly. Each profile had been carefully crafted for its intended audience. The Bumble version emphasized creativity and casual dating. The Tinder profile targeted a younger, more party-oriented crowd. The Hinge profile was clearly designed to attract serious relationship seekers who would appreciate detailed information and professional accomplishments.
Rachel hadn't just stolen my identity. She'd created multiple versions of me, each optimized for different types of men and different relationship goals. She'd been running what amounted to a sophisticated catfishing operation using my face and my life story.
By dawn, I documented everything I could find. Screenshots of the profiles, lists of the photos being used, notes about the different biographical details each version emphasized. I printed copies of everything, creating a physical record that Rachel couldn't delete or modify if she discovered I was onto her. The worst part wasn't just discovering the profiles themselves, but realizing how much thought and planning had gone into creating them. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a moment of poor judgment. Rachel had been systematically studying me, collecting my photos, crafting different versions of my personality, and maintaining multiple fictional relationships simultaneously. I tried to think back through our recent interactions, looking for clues about when this might have started. The timeline seemed to align with her increased interest in photography and her probing questions about my dating preferences. She'd been gathering intelligence for months, possibly since shortly after she moved to Austin. But why? What could she possibly gain from pretending to be me online? The question consumed me as I sat in my kitchen watching the sunrise through my apartment window. Around 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel herself. "Good morning, sis. Beautiful day today. Want to grab coffee before your Sunday yoga class?" The casual normalcy of her message felt surreal after what I'd discovered. Here she was, texting me as if nothing had happened, while somewhere in the city there were men who thought they'd been building relationships with me for weeks. Men who had no idea they'd been talking to my sister, sharing their hopes and vulnerabilities with someone who was essentially wearing my face like a mask. I stared at Rachel's text for several minutes, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand explanations and apologies, but I realized I needed more information before I could have that conversation effectively. I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd been doing and why. "Can't do coffee today. Working on a big project. Maybe next week?" "No problem. You work too hard, though. Don't forget to take care of yourself." The irony of Rachel telling me to take care of myself while she was actively harming me by stealing my identity wasn't lost on me. I wondered if she felt any guilt about what she was doing or if she'd somehow justified it to herself as harmless or even beneficial. I spent Sunday morning diving deeper into my investigation. I created accounts on various dating platforms so I could search for my own photos more systematically. The process was disturbing and time-consuming, but I felt like I needed to know exactly how extensive the damage was. On Match.com, I found another version of myself, this one targeting an older demographic with an emphasis on stability and long-term relationship goals. The photos were more conservative, showing me in professional settings and family-friendly environments. The bio mentioned my desire to settle down and start a family, something I'd discussed with Rachel during a vulnerable conversation about my biological clock and relationship anxiety. Each new discovery felt like a fresh violation. Rachel hadn't just stolen my photos, she'd been mining our private conversations for content, taking my insecurities and hopes and using them as bait to attract men online. She knew exactly which of my vulnerabilities would appeal to different types of people, and she'd been exploiting that knowledge systematically. By noon, I'd found traces of myself on 6 different dating platforms. Some profiles were active and recently updated, while others seemed to have been abandoned or suspended. I started to wonder how long Rachel had been doing this, and whether I was the only person she'd targeted this way. I decided to call Nathan to check in about the planned meeting that evening. He answered on the second ring, sounding nervous but curious. "I've been thinking about this all night," he said. "I keep going back through our conversations, trying to figure out if there were any signs that something was off. But honestly, everything felt so genuine. Whoever this person is, they really know you well." "Too well," I said grimly. "I've found 5 more dating profiles using my photos. This is bigger than we thought." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "That's insane. What kind of person does something like this? It was a question I'd been asking myself all morning. The Rachel I thought I knew wasn't manipulative or calculating. She was dramatic and attention-seeking, yes, but not malicious. This level of deception required a different kind of personality than I'd ever seen from my sister. "Are you still planning to go to the dinner tonight?" I asked. "Yes, if you still think that's a good idea. I'm supposed to meet her at Yuchi at 7:30. Should I try to get more information out of her during our text conversations today?" "Be careful," I warned. "Don't ask anything that might make her suspicious. Just act normal, like you're still excited about meeting." "What are you going to do?" I'd been thinking about that question all morning. "I'm going to follow you to the restaurant. I want to see what happens when she doesn't show up, and I want to see if she sends someone else in her place." The plan felt slightly stalkerish, but I needed to understand what Rachel's endgame was. Had she been planning to show up to these dates herself? Did she have some way of backing out at the last minute? Or was she simply enjoying the attention and validation of online flirting without any intention of meeting these men in person? I spent the afternoon preparing for what felt like a spy mission. I chose clothes that would help me blend in at Yuchi, nice enough to fit in at an upscale restaurant, but not so distinctive that I'd be easily spotted if Rachel happened to show up. I made a reservation for myself at the bar, planning to arrive early and position myself where I could observe Nathan's table without being obvious. At 5 o'clock, Nathan texted me an update. "She's still confirming for tonight, seems excited about it, asked what I'm planning to wear, and said she's nervous but in a good way." The messages Rachel was sending as me sounded exactly like things I might say before a first date. She'd been studying my communication style as carefully as she had studied my appearance and interests. The thought of her crafting flirtatious messages in my voice made my skin crawl. "Has she sent any more photos?" I asked Nathan. "A few. One of her getting ready for tonight and one of her dog. They look recent." This was concerning. If Rachel was sending current photos, she was either using very recent pictures she had taken of me, or she was taking new ones specifically for this deception. The dog photo was particularly troubling since she had been using Winston as part of her fake persona, possibly even taking him on photo shoots without my knowledge. I arrived at Uchi at 7 o'clock, 30 minutes before Nathan's scheduled meeting time. The restaurant was busy, which was perfect for my surveillance needs. I secured a seat at the bar with a clear view of the main dining area and ordered a glass of wine to justify my presence. Nathan arrived promptly at 7:25, looking nervous but hopeful. He was dressed nicely in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that made my heart ache for him. He clearly had genuine feelings for the person he thought he was meeting, having no idea that she was a fiction created by my sister. The hostess seated him at a table near the window, and he checked his phone, presumably texting me to let me know he had arrived. I watched him order a drink and settle in to wait, checking the door every few minutes with anticipation. 7:30 came and went with no sign of Rachel. At 7:45, Nathan texted me, "She's running late. Says she got stuck in traffic but will be here soon." I found myself scanning the restaurant for any sign of my sister, wondering if she was planning some kind of elaborate reveal or if she was watching from somewhere else entirely. The longer Nathan waited, the more uncomfortable I felt about my role in this deception, even though I hadn't chosen to be part of it. At 8 o'clock, Nathan received another message. "So sorry, emergency came up with my sister. Can we reschedule for tomorrow night? I was really looking forward to meeting you." The mention of an emergency involving her sister felt like a deliberate taunt, as if Rachel knew I was somehow watching and wanted to mock me. Nathan looked disappointed but understanding, typing back what I assumed was a supportive response. He stayed at the restaurant for another 15 minutes, finishing his drink and presumably exchanging more messages with fake me, before finally asking for his check. I watched him leave, flowers still in hand, and felt a surge of anger at my sister for manipulating someone who seemed genuinely kind. I waited until Nathan was gone before leaving myself, not wanting to make our surveillance obvious to any restaurant staff who might remember us later. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Hey sis, hope you had a good day. Want to get breakfast tomorrow? I have something exciting to tell you." The timing of her message felt significant.
She'd just stood up Nathan, presumably sending him apologetic messages about a sister emergency, and now she was reaching out to me with unusual enthusiasm. I wondered if this was part of some larger plan, or if she was simply enjoying the chaos she was creating. "Sure," I texted back. "Let's meet at Kirby Lane at 9. "Perfect. Can't wait to catch up. Love you." The casual declaration of love at the end of her message felt particularly manipulative given what she'd been doing behind my back. I drove home that evening with more questions than answers, but with a growing understanding that Rachel's behavior wasn't just a betrayal of my trust, it was evidence of a deeper psychological issue that I'd never recognized before. That night, I received a long text from Nathan, describing his disappointment about the canceled date, but expressing understanding about family emergencies. He mentioned that I had been very apologetic and had suggested meeting the following evening instead, this time at a different restaurant. Rachel was escalating. Instead of backing down after the failed meeting, she was doubling down on the deception, making new plans and creating new opportunities for disappointment and manipulation. I realized that confronting her the next morning might not be enough to stop whatever psychological game she was playing. I needed to understand her motivations before I could figure out how to protect myself and the innocent men she was deceiving. The breakfast meeting would give me a chance to study her behavior and look for signs of guilt, remorse, or awareness of the harm she was causing. But as I finally fell asleep that Sunday night, I had a growing suspicion that Rachel knew exactly what she was doing, and that her betrayal of me was just the beginning of something much larger and more disturbing than I had initially realized. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood, as I drove to Kirby Lane Cafe to meet Rachel. I'd chosen a table in the back corner where we could talk privately, but where I'd also have a clear view of her facial expressions and body language. After discovering the extent of her deception, I felt like I was meeting a stranger rather than my sister. Rachel arrived 10 minutes late, which was typical for her, but she seemed unusually energetic. Her hair was freshly styled, she was wearing a new dress I didn't recognize, and she had the kind of glowing confidence that usually meant she had news to share or drama to discuss. "Brooklyn," she said, sliding into the booth across from me with an enthusiasm that felt performative. "You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" The irony of her concern for my well-being, given what she'd been doing behind my back, almost made me laugh. Instead, I forced a smile and ordered coffee, trying to appear normal while studying her demeanor for any signs of guilt, remorse, or awareness of the harm she was causing. "I'm fine," I said. "Just had a busy weekend. You mentioned you had something exciting to tell me?" Rachel's eyes lit up in a way that immediately made me suspicious. "Oh my God, yes. So you know how I've been trying to get back into dating since moving here? Well, I've been having the most amazing conversations with this guy I met online. His name is Nathan, and he's just perfect." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. She was talking about Nathan, the same Nathan who had shown up at my apartment, the same Nathan who had waited for fake me at Uchi the night before. But she was describing him as if she'd met him herself, as if their connection was real and personal. "Tell me about him," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. "He's 31, works in marketing for a tech company, really smart and funny. We've been texting for weeks, and our conversations just flow so naturally. It's like we've known each other forever." Rachel paused to take a sip of her mimosa, clearly savoring the opportunity to share her excitement. "We were supposed to meet last night, but I had to cancel at the last minute because of this family emergency." She said family emergency without a hint of irony, even though she was sitting across from her only local family member who definitely did not experience any emergency the previous evening. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, curious to see how elaborate her lie would become. "Oh, you know how our cousin Jessica has been going through that messy divorce? She called crying and needed someone to come over immediately. I couldn't just abandon her when she was having a crisis." "We don't have a cousin named Jessica." Rachel was layering fictional family members on top of her fake dating persona, creating an entire imaginary support network to justify her deception.
The ease with which she constructed these lies was genuinely disturbing. "That's really thoughtful of you to be there for family," I said. "But didn't this Nathan guy mind that you canceled on him?" "He was so understanding about it. That's what I love about him. He really gets how important family is. We're supposed to meet tonight instead, at this cute little wine bar in the East End. I'm honestly nervous, but excited." Rachel was describing plans for a second date with Nathan, apparently planning to stand him up again or possibly even show up herself this time. I realized I needed to probe deeper to understand what her ultimate goal was. "Have you video chatted with him? Sent recent photos?" I asked. "We've exchanged lots of pictures, but no video calls yet. I'm kind of old-fashioned about that. I like to meet in person first, you know? There's something more romantic about seeing someone for the first time face-to-face." This response confirmed that Rachel was indeed planning to meet Nathan in person, which raised a whole new set of questions. Did she think she could somehow pass herself off as me? Did she have some plan to explain the discrepancy between her appearance and the photos she'd been using? "What does he think you look like?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me the Bumble profile I'd seen on Nathan's phone the night before. "These are the photos I've been using. I think they represent me pretty well, don't you?" She was showing me pictures of me while asking if they represented her well. The audacity was breathtaking, but what struck me most was that Rachel seemed genuinely convinced that this made sense somehow. "Rachel, we're sisters. We look really similar, especially in photos. I mean, people have always said we could be twins." She scrolled through the profile pictures casually. "I know some of these were taken when we were hanging out together, but that doesn't make them pictures of you specifically." This was not the response I'd been expecting. Rachel wasn't denying that she'd used the photos. She was claiming that our resemblance made it acceptable, as if sisterly similarity gave her the right to appropriate my identity. "Rachel, we don't look that similar. You're blonde, I'm brunette. You're 3 inches shorter than me. You have brown eyes, mine are green. These photos show someone with my specific features wearing my clothes in places where I was present and you were holding the camera." "You're being really weird about this, Brooke. It's not like I'm stealing your identity or anything. I'm just using some flattering photos that happen to include both of us." The gaslighting was so blatant, it took my breath away. Rachel was staring directly at pictures of me while insisting they could reasonably be considered pictures of her. She was rewriting reality in real time, apparently convinced that her explanation made logical sense. "Show me one photo in that profile where you're actually visible," I said. She scrolled through the images more slowly this time. I watched her face as she examined each one. The photo of me at Magnolia Cafe, the one from Zilker Park with Winston, the professional headshot from my company website that she must have downloaded. "Okay, maybe these specific photos are more you than me," she admitted finally. "But I've been thinking of changing them anyway. Nathan and I have such a strong emotional connection that the physical stuff won't matter once we meet." "Rachel, you've been catfishing this man using my photos and my personal information. That's not an emotional connection. That's fraud." "Don't be so dramatic. Catfishing is when you pretend to be someone completely different. I'm still me. I'm just presenting myself in the most flattering way possible. That's what everyone does on dating apps."
Her ability to minimize and rationalize what she'd been doing was genuinely frightening. She'd created elaborate fictional personas, stolen my identity across multiple platforms, and manipulated numerous strangers. But in her mind, this was just normal dating app behavior. "What about all the personal details you've been sharing? My job, my family history, my interests?" "We have the same family history, Brooklyn, and your job isn't that different from what I'm trying to do with social media marketing. As for interests, I'm trying to expand my horizons. Maybe I should like hiking more. Maybe I should try wine tasting." Rachel was reframing identity theft as self-improvement. In her version of events, she wasn't stealing my life. She was aspirationally becoming a better version of herself, using me as a template. What happens when Nathan sees you in person and realizes you look nothing like the photos? I think you're underestimating how much we look alike. And besides, by that point, he'll already be interested in my personality. Physical attraction is just the beginning of a relationship. I stared at my sister, trying to understand the mental gymnastics that had led her to this point. She seemed genuinely convinced that her plan could work, that a man who had been attracted to my appearance and charmed by my personal stories would seamlessly transfer those feelings to her once they met. Rachel, I need you to delete those profiles, all of them, and you need to tell Nathan the truth. Her expression hardened. I'm not doing that. This is the best relationship I've had in years, and I'm not going to sabotage it because you're jealous. Jealous of what? You're using my photos. Jealous that I'm putting myself out there and taking risks while you sit at home with your dog complaining about being single, but not actually doing anything about it. This accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had been struggling with dating, feeling frustrated with the apps and pessimistic about finding genuine connection. But Rachel was using my own insecurities against me, weaponizing my vulnerability to justify her betrayal. I'm not jealous, Rachel. I'm violated. You've been stealing my identity for months. You've been manipulating innocent people, and you've been lying to me about everything while pretending to be a supportive sister. I never lied to you about anything important. You created fake dating profiles using my photos and personal information. You've been having romantic conversations with men while pretending to be me. You stood someone up last night using a fictional family emergency as an excuse. How is any of that not lying about something important? Rachel was quiet for a moment, stirring her mimosa with the plastic straw and avoiding eye contact. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller and more defensive. You don't understand what it's like to be the younger sister. You've always been the successful one, the pretty one, the one everyone notices first. I moved to Austin to start over, to build my own life, but everywhere I go, I'm still just Brooklyn's little sister. This explanation felt like the beginning of honesty, but it also revealed the depth of her resentment and self-perception issues. So you decided to literally become me instead? I decided to see what it would feel like to be you, to experience the world as someone confident and successful and interesting. And you know what? It feels amazing. Men actually want to talk to me when they think I'm you. They ask thoughtful questions and share their feelings and make real effort to connect. Because they think they're talking to someone real, Rachel. You've been catfishing them with a fictional version of me that you created by combining my appearance with an idealized personality. The personality isn't fictional. Those are my real thoughts and feelings in those conversations. The only thing I borrowed was your photos. She was still minimizing, still refusing to acknowledge the full scope of what she'd done. But her admission about wanting to experience life as me revealed a psychological motivation that was both sad and deeply troubling. Rachel, this has to stop today. You need to come clean to Nathan and delete all the profiles. No. Her response was firm and immediate. I'm meeting Nathan tonight, and I'm going to see where this relationship goes. You can't stop me. Actually, I can. I've already been in contact with Nathan. He knows about the fake profiles. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that someone was using my photos to catfish people and that I was trying to figure out who was responsible. You didn't tell him it was me.
We stared at each other across the table, the tension thick enough to cut. Rachel's excited energy from the beginning of our breakfast had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold calculation that I'd never seen from her before. If you sabotage this relationship, I will never forgive you, she said quietly. If you continue this deception, you'll be sabotaging far more than just a relationship, Rachel. You'll be destroying any trust between us and continuing to harm innocent people who don't deserve to be manipulated.
She stood up abruptly, throwing a $20 bill on the table. "I have to get ready for my date." "Rachel, please don't do this." She walked away without responding, leaving me sitting alone in the cafe with the realization that my sister was far more damaged and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Her refusal to acknowledge reality, her ability to rationalize harmful behavior, and her complete lack of empathy for the people she was deceiving suggested psychological issues that went well beyond sibling rivalry or low self-esteem. I knew I had to warn Nathan about what was coming, but I also realized that the situation was spiraling beyond my ability to control or fix. Rachel wasn't just catfishing strangers. She was living in a fantasy world where she could become me by stealing my identity, and she was willing to fight to protect that fantasy, regardless of who got hurt in the process. I sat in my car outside Kirby Lane for 20 minutes after Rachel left, trying to process what had just happened. The sister I thought I knew, dramatic but ultimately harmless, had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely delusional. Her casual dismissal of my concerns, her elaborate justifications, and her complete lack of empathy for the people she was deceiving suggested this went far beyond simple jealousy or poor judgment. My hands were shaking as I called Nathan. He answered immediately, sounding tense. "Brooklyn, I wasn't expecting to hear from you so early. Is everything okay?" "We need to talk urgently. Can you meet me somewhere private? Rachel is planning to show up to your date tonight, and there are things you need to know before that happens." There was a long pause. She's actually going to show up? But the photos! "That's what we need to discuss. Can you meet me at Mozart's Coffee on Lake Austin? It's public, but we can find a quiet corner. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Mozart's Coffee was one of those sprawling Austin institutions with multiple decks overlooking the lake, perfect for having sensitive conversations without being overheard. I arrived first and secured a table on the far deck, away from the main crowd. When Nathan walked up, he looked like he hadn't slept much either.
Nathan scrolled through the images, his expression growing more disturbed with each profile. Jesus, this is like a full-time operation. How long has she been doing this? Based on what I can piece together, probably since shortly after she moved to Austin 6 months ago. She's been systematically collecting photos of me, studying my personality and preferences, and creating different versions of fake me for different audiences. But why? What does she get out of this? I told him about my breakfast conversation with Rachel, her claims about our resemblance, her plan to meet him in person, and her psychological justifications for the deception. Nathan listened with growing incredulity. She actually thinks this could work? That I wouldn't notice she looks completely different from the photos? She seems to genuinely believe you two have such a strong emotional connection that the physical discrepancy won't matter. She's convinced herself that she's been sharing her real personality in your conversations, so meeting her will just be a natural progression of your relationship. Nathan rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. The conversations did feel really genuine. She, or whoever was writing those messages, seemed to understand me in a way that felt rare. We talked about everything from childhood memories to career anxieties to what we wanted in long-term relationships. That's because she was using real information about my life and personality, combined with details from our private conversations. She's been mining my personal experiences and emotional vulnerabilities to create content for these fake relationships. That's so violating, not just for you, but for everyone she's been talking to. I shared things with her that I don't usually tell people until I've known them for months. This was something I'd been thinking about a lot. The emotional damage Rachel was inflicting on her victims. These men had been forming genuine attachments to someone who didn't exist, sharing their hopes and fears with a person who was manipulating them for psychological gratification.
Nathan, can I ask you something personal? In your conversations with fake me, what kinds of things did she seem most interested in discussing? He thought for a moment. Relationship history was a big topic. She wanted to know about my past relationships, what had gone wrong, what I was looking for in a partner. She also asked a lot about my job, my family dynamics, my long-term goals. But it never felt invasive because she was sharing similar things about herself. What did she tell you about her family? She talked about growing up in Phoenix, having a complicated relationship with her younger sister, who had just moved to Austin. She said her sister was going through some career struggles and relationship issues, and that she was trying to be supportive while also maintaining healthy boundaries. The irony was staggering. Rachel had been positioning herself as the mature, stable sister while casting me as the problematic one who needed support. She'd been using our real family dynamics as content while completely inverting our roles. Did she ever mention feeling competitive with her sister or jealous of her success? Actually, the opposite. She talked about how proud she was of her sister's achievements and how she wanted to help her gain more confidence. She made it sound like like her sister, was the one with self-esteem issues. Rachel had been rewriting our entire relationship in these conversations, making herself the supportive older sister and me the struggling younger sibling. She'd appropriated not just my appearance and personal details, but my actual role in our family dynamic. Nathan, there's something else you need to know. Rachel is absolutely planning to show up tonight. She's convinced this relationship is real and that she can make it work somehow. When I confronted her this morning, she became hostile and threatened to never forgive me if I interfered. What do you think she's planning to do? Just show up and hope I don't notice she looks nothing like the photos? I honestly don't know. She might have some elaborate explanation prepared, or she might be delusional enough to think the resemblance is closer than it actually is. But based on her behavior this morning, she's not going to back down voluntarily. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching boats move across Lake Austin while we both processed the situation. Finally, Nathan spoke up. I feel like I need to go through with the date, just to see what happens. Not because I want to pursue anything with her, but because I need closure on this whole situation. Does that make sense? It makes sense, but I'm worried it might be dangerous. Rachel is clearly not thinking rationally, and I don't know how she'll react if things don't go according to her fantasy. What if you were there? Not obviously, but nearby in case something goes wrong. The idea of conducting another surveillance operation felt exhausting. But I realized Nathan was right. Someone needed to be there to witness whatever Rachel was planning and to intervene if the situation became dangerous or harmful. Where are you supposed to meet her? Pêché, that wine bar on East 6th Street, 7 o'clock. I knew the place. Intimate lighting, cozy seating arrangements, definitely designed for romantic encounters. It was exactly the kind of venue Rachel would choose for maximum emotional impact. I'll be there. But Nathan, promise me that if things get weird or uncomfortable, you'll leave immediately. Don't feel obligated to protect her feelings or play along with whatever story she tells. Trust me, after everything I've learned, I have no interest in protecting her feelings. We exchanged contact information and agreed on a simple signal system. If Nathan felt unsafe or needed me to intervene, he would text me a specific code word. I would position myself somewhere in the bar where I could observe without being obvious. After Nathan left, I spent the afternoon researching catfishing and psychological manipulation online, trying to understand what I was dealing with. Most of the articles focused on strangers who targeted victims for money or sexual gratification, but Rachel's motivations seemed different and more complex. She appeared to be using the fake relationships for emotional validation and psychological experimentation. She wanted to experience what it felt like to be desired and pursued as me, but she also seemed to genuinely believe she could transition these fictional relationships into real ones with herself. The more I read about personality disorders and delusional thinking, the more concerned I became about Rachel's mental state. Her ability to rationalize contradictory information, Her lack of empathy for her victims and her grandiose sense of entitlement suggested serious psychological issues that went beyond normal sibling rivalry.
I also started documenting everything more systematically, creating a detailed timeline of Rachel's behavior since moving to Austin. I printed emails, saved screenshots, and wrote down every concerning conversation we'd had. If this situation escalated further, I wanted to have comprehensive evidence of her pattern of deception and manipulation. At 5:30, I started getting ready for what felt like the most surreal evening of my life. I chose dark clothing that would help me blend into the bar's atmosphere, and I practiced positioning myself in ways that would give me clear sightlines without being conspicuous. As I drove toward East 6th Street, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Getting ready for my date with Nathan. Wish me luck. I have a really good feeling about tonight." The casual tone of her message, as if she were going on a normal date rather than planning to deceive someone who thought he was meeting me, reinforced my growing conviction that Rachel was genuinely detached from reality. I arrived at Pesce 30 minutes early and managed to secure a seat at the bar with a clear view of the main seating area. The wine bar was dimly lit, with exposed brick walls and intimate two-person tables scattered throughout the space. It was exactly the kind of place where Rachel could stage a romantic encounter while making it difficult for Nathan to leave quickly if things became uncomfortable. At exactly 7 o'clock, Nathan walked in, looking nervous but determined. He spoke to the hostess and was seated at a corner table that offered privacy but also made him somewhat trapped. He'd have to walk past most of the other diners to reach the exit. 7:15 came and went with no sign of Rachel. Nathan checked his phone repeatedly, presumably receiving messages from fake me about running late or having trouble finding parking. At 7:25, Rachel finally appeared. But she wasn't alone. She walked into the wine bar accompanied by a woman I'd never seen before. Someone who was about my height and build, with shoulder-length brown hair styled similarly to mine. This woman was wearing a dress almost identical to one I owned, and from a distance, in the dim lighting, the resemblance to me was actually quite striking. I watched in horror as Rachel approached Nathan's table with this stranger, apparently planning to pass her off as me. Nathan stood up, clearly confused, as Rachel made introductions that I couldn't hear from my position at the bar. The stranger sat down across from Nathan while Rachel remained standing, gesturing animatedly and apparently explaining the situation. Nathan's body language became increasingly tense, and he kept looking between the two women with obvious bewilderment. After about 5 minutes of conversation, Rachel hugged the stranger goodbye and left the wine bar, leaving Nathan alone with someone who was presumably supposed to be his date with me. I realized that Rachel had hired an actress or found someone willing to impersonate me for the evening. This wasn't just catfishing online anymore. It was an elaborate confidence scheme involving multiple people and carefully orchestrated deception. Nathan looked completely lost as the stranger began talking to him, presumably trying to maintain the fiction that she was Brooklyn Sinclair. I could see him checking his phone under the table, and within minutes, I received his predetermined signal text. I stood up from the bar and walked directly to Nathan's table. "Excuse me," I said to the woman impersonating me, "but I think you're sitting in my seat." Both Nathan and the stranger looked up at me with expressions of complete shock. The woman recovered first, standing up quickly with a nervous laugh. "I think there's been a confusion," she said. "I'm supposed to be meeting Nathan for a date." "No confusion at all," I said calmly. "You're impersonating me, using my name and my personal information. Nathan, this is the real Brooklyn Sinclair." The woman looked between me and Nathan, clearly realizing that her evening gig had just become much more complicated than she'd been told it would be. "I'm going to go," she said quickly, grabbing her purse and heading for the exit. Nathan stared at me as I sat down across from him. "How many people are involved in this?" he asked. "I honestly have no idea anymore, but I think we need to call the police." Nathan and I sat in stunned silence for several moments after the fake Buckland fled the wine bar. The reality of what had just happened was almost too bizarre to process. Rachel hadn't just been catfishing online, she'd recruited an accomplice to physically impersonate me in real life. "I need a drink," Nathan said finally. "Actually, I need several drinks, and then I need to understand how your sister managed to find someone willing to pretend to be you for an entire evening." I flagged down our server and ordered a bottle of wine, figuring we'd both need it for the conversation ahead. The woman who was just here, did she seem like she knew details about my life, or was she just playing a generic role? "She knew things," Nathan said grimly. "Not as many specifics as your sister had shared in our texts, but she knew about your job, your dog, general family information. She even mentioned specific restaurants in Austin that you'd supposedly recommended."
This meant Rachel had briefed her accomplice thoroughly, sharing not just my physical appearance, but detailed background information. The level of planning and coordination required was genuinely frightening. "Nathan, I know this is a lot to ask, but I need you to tell me everything that woman said from the moment she sat down. Every detail could be important." He took a long sip of wine before responding. "She introduced herself as Brooklyn and apologized for being late. She said her sister Rachel had walked her in because Rachel wanted to make sure she found the right table, which seemed weird at the time, but I figured it was just sisterly protectiveness. What else? She seemed nervous, which I attributed to first date jitters. She asked about my job, complimented the wine selection, mentioned that she'd been looking forward to meeting me all week, but something felt off about her energy. It wasn't the same personality that had come through in our text conversations." This suggested that while Rachel had provided her accomplice with factual information, she hadn't been able to transfer the deeper personality traits and communication style that had made their online connection feel genuine. Did she seem like she was reading from a script, or did the conversation flow naturally? Definitely scripted. She had answers ready for basic questions, but when I tried to reference specific things we discussed in our texts, she'd deflect or change the subject. At one point, I mentioned something funny you'd told me about your coworker, and she just laughed vaguely and said, "Oh yeah, that was hilarious," without any sign of actually remembering the story. I pulled out my phone and called Rachel. It went straight to voicemail, which wasn't surprising given what had just happened. I left a message anyway. "Rachel, we need to talk immediately. What you did tonight crossed every possible line. Call me back within the next hour, or I'm filing a police report for identity theft and fraud." Nathan looked surprised. "You're really going to involve the police?" What she did tonight wasn't just catfishing anymore. She hired someone to impersonate me, using my name and personal information to deceive you. That's identity theft at minimum, possibly fraud depending on what she was trying to gain from it. What do you think she was trying to gain? It was a question I'd been wrestling with all day. Rachel's motivations seemed to go beyond simple romantic manipulation or even psychological validation. The elaborate planning, the accomplice, the willingness to escalate rather than back down when confronted, it all suggested something more calculated and potentially dangerous. I think that she's been using these fake relationships to experiment with different versions of herself, I said slowly. But I also think there might be financial motivations I haven't discovered yet. Financial? Think about it. She's unemployed, but somehow has money for new clothes, expensive restaurants, hiring accomplices. She's been having intimate conversations with dozens of men across multiple platforms. It's possible she's been asking for money, gifts, or other financial support while pretending to be me. Nathan's expression darkened. She never asked me for money directly, but there were a few conversations where she mentioned financial stress about student loans and starting her freelance business. I was actually planning to offer to help with some of her expenses if tonight's date went well. That's probably exactly what she was hoping for. She's been building emotional connections with men while pretending to be me, then positioning herself to receive financial support from them. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. "Where are you?" I answered without a greeting. "Brooklyn, I can explain everything. Can we meet somewhere private to talk?" "Absolutely not. You just hired someone to impersonate me on a date with a man you've been catfishing for weeks. We're way past private conversations, Rachel. It's not what it looked like. I was trying to protect both of you." "Protect us from what, exactly?"
I realized that meeting Nathan myself would be too complicated, but I also didn't want to just disappoint him by canceling again, so I found someone who could give him closure while letting him down gently. The rationalization was so absurd it left me speechless for a moment. Rachel had somehow convinced herself that hiring a fake me to break up with Nathan was an act of kindness rather than an elaborate deception. Rachel, you hired someone to commit identity theft. That's a felony. I didn't hire anyone. Madison was a friend who was helping me out of a difficult situation.
Madison? The woman you met tonight. She's an actress I know from some social media work. I explained that I'd gotten in over my head with online dating and needed help ending things gracefully. What exactly did you tell Madison about the situation? Just that I'd been using some outdated photos that didn't represent my current appearance, and that I needed someone to meet this guy and explain that the relationship couldn't continue. Even her explanation to her accomplice had been layered with lies. Madison probably thought she was helping Rachel out of an embarrassing catfishing situation, not realizing that she was being used to impersonate an entirely different person. Rachel, where are you right now? I'm at home. Brooklyn, please don't call the police. I know I made mistakes, but I never meant for anyone to get hurt. People are getting hurt. Nathan has been emotionally manipulated for weeks. Madison got pulled into a criminal conspiracy without understanding what she was doing. And I've had my identity stolen and used to deceive dozens of people. It's not that serious. It is exactly that serious. I'm giving you 1 hour to come to my apartment and explain everything. If you don't show up, I'm filing a police report. I hung up and turned back to Nathan, who had been listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. She's coming to your apartment? Is that safe? Probably not, but I need answers before I decide how to handle this legally. Would you be willing to come with me? I think having a witness present might keep her from trying to manipulate the situation. Of course, but maybe we should meet somewhere public instead. I want to search her apartment if she'll let me. I need to know how extensive this operation has been, whether she's been targeting other people besides you, and whether there's evidence of financial fraud. We paid our check and drove separately to my apartment complex. On the way, I called my sister Emma in Phoenix and briefly explained the situation. As a therapist, she'd dealt with personality disorders and manipulative behavior professionally, and I wanted her perspective on how to handle Rachel safely. This level of deception and planning suggests some serious psychological issues, Emma said, after I'd summarized the evening's events. The fact that she escalated to involving an accomplice rather than backing down when confronted is particularly concerning. People with narcissistic or antisocial traits often double down when their manipulation is exposed. What should I do? Document everything, involve the police if you feel it's necessary, and be very careful about meeting her alone. People who are capable of this level of manipulation can become unpredictable when their schemes fall apart. I'm bringing Nathan with me, and we're meeting at my apartment where I feel more in control of the situation. Good. But Brooklyn, you need to be prepared for the possibility that Rachel isn't going to suddenly become honest and remorseful. She's invested a lot of time and energy in these deceptions, and admitting the full truth would require her to confront some very uncomfortable realities about herself. Rachel arrived at my apartment 45 minutes later, looking agitated and defensive. She barely acknowledged Nathan's presence, focusing all her attention on me with an intensity that felt aggressive. "We need to talk privately," she said immediately. "Nathan is staying. He's been one of your primary victims, and he deserves to hear whatever explanations you're planning to offer." Victims? Brooklyn, you're being incredibly dramatic about this whole situation. Rachel, you hired someone to impersonate me tonight. How is that not victimization? She sat down on my couch uninvited, adopting a posture that suggested she planned to be there for a while. I've been trying to protect everyone involved. The situation got complicated, and I was looking for a way to resolve it without anyone getting unnecessarily hurt. Resolve what situation, exactly? The fact that I'd developed real feelings for Nathan through our conversations, but I'd made some mistakes with the photos I'd used initially. She was still referring to identity theft as mistakes with photos, as if she had accidentally uploaded the wrong images rather than systematically stealing my appearance and personal information. Rachel, show me your phone.
What? Show me your phone. I want to see the conversations you've been having as me, and I want to see what other dating profiles you're currently running. I'm not comfortable with that. Those are private conversations. They're conversations you've been having while pretending to be me. There's nothing private about them. Nathan spoke up for the first time since Rachel had arrived. I'd like to see them too. I want to understand how much of what you told me was true. Rachel looked between us, clearly trying to calculate her options. Fine, but you have to understand that I was trying to be the best version of myself in those conversations. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone maliciously. She reluctantly handed over her phone, and what we found in the next hour was far worse than anything I had imagined. Rachel had active conversations with 47 different men across 8 dating platforms. She'd been using variations of my name, photos, and personal information to maintain relationships with men in 3 different cities, not just Austin, but also Dallas and San Antonio. Some of these conversations had been going on for months, with elaborate backstories and emotional intimacy that went far beyond casual dating. But most disturbing were the financial elements we discovered. Rachel had been accepting gifts, money for emergencies, and even monthly financial support from several of her victims. One man named Marcus had been sending her $500 a month for the past 4 months to help with what she'd described as medical expenses for her fictional sick grandmother. Another man, David, had purchased a laptop and expensive jewelry that had been shipped to a P.O. box Rachel had set up under my name. This isn't just catfishing, Nathan said quietly. This is organized fraud. Rachel's response to being confronted with this evidence was perhaps the most chilling part of the entire evening. Instead of showing remorse or acknowledging the harm she had caused, she became angry and defensive. These men wanted to help me. I never forced anyone to give me anything. They offered because they cared about me. They cared about Brooklyn. They gave you money because they thought they were helping me, someone they'd formed genuine emotional connections with. The emotional connections were real. I was sharing my actual thoughts and feelings in those conversations, while pretending to be someone else entirely, while being the person I wanted to become. The conversation continued for another hour, but it became clear that Rachel was fundamentally unable or unwilling to acknowledge the severity of what she had done. In her mind, she'd been conducting a series of romantic experiments that had gotten slightly out of hand, not systematically defrauding dozens of people while stealing her sister's identity. By the time Rachel left that night, I knew I had no choice but to involve law enforcement. This wasn't a family matter anymore. It was a criminal enterprise that had been victimizing innocent people for months, and it showed no signs of stopping voluntarily. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my parents. Rachel had called them at 5 a.m, hysterical and claiming I was trying to destroy her life over a misunderstanding. She had apparently told them I was threatening to have her arrested for using some family photos on social media without permission. My mother's voicemail was frantic. "Brooklyn, honey, please call us back. Rachel is saying you're going to press charges against her. We don't understand what's happening, but surely you two can work this out without involving lawyers or police. She's your sister." The manipulation was breathtaking. Rachel had called our parents in the middle of the night, woken them up in a panic, and completely reframed the situation to make herself look like the victim of my unreasonable demands.
She had turned identity theft and financial fraud into a family squabble over photo permissions. I called my parents back immediately. My father answered, sounding exhausted and confused. "Dad, Rachel didn't just use family photos. She's been impersonating me on dating apps for months, taking money from men who think they're in relationships with me, and last night she hired an actress to physically impersonate me on a date." "Brooklyn, that can't be right. Rachel said you were upset about some pictures, but identity theft? That's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, Dad. I have evidence. Screenshots of dozens of fake profiles, financial records showing thousands of dollars she's received while pretending to be me, and multiple witnesses who can confirm what she's been doing." There was a long pause. "Can you send us some of this evidence? Your mother and I need to understand what's really happening here."
I spent the next hour compiling a comprehensive file of Rachel's activities, screenshots of the dating profiles, examples of her conversations with victims, records of the money she'd received, photos of the checks and gift receipts I'd found when searching her phone. I created a timeline showing how the deception had escalated over months, culminating in the actress incident. When I emailed everything to my parents, I included a note explaining that I'd tried to handle this privately by confronting Rachel directly, but that her refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing or stop the behavior had forced me to consider legal action. My phone rang 20 minutes later. This time it was my mother, and she sounded devastated. "Brooklyn, I don't understand how Rachel could do something like this. The evidence you sent us, it's overwhelming. But she's our daughter. Isn't there some way to handle this within the family?" "Mom, she's been committing fraud. She's taken thousands of dollars from innocent people while pretending to be me. Some of these men have been sending her money for months, thinking they were helping me through financial difficulties. That's not a family matter. It's a crime." "What if she pays the money back? What if she apologizes to everyone involved?" "She's shown no remorse, Mom. When I confronted her last night, she became angry and defensive. She still thinks what she's been doing is justified. And even if she wanted to make amends, some of her victims don't know they've been deceived. They think they've been in genuine relationships with me." My mother was quiet for a long time. "What are you going to do?" "I'm meeting with a detective this afternoon. I need to file a formal report and let law enforcement decide how to handle this." "Will you let us know what happens? Despite everything, we love Rachel, and we're worried about her." After hanging up with my parents, I called the Austin Police Department and was connected to Detective Sarah Martinez in the cybercrime unit. She listened to my summary of the situation and asked me to come in that afternoon with all of the evidence I'd collected. The police station was busy and overwhelming, but Detective Martinez was professional and reassuring. She'd clearly dealt with similar cases before and understood the psychological impact of identity theft even when no physical violence was involved. "This type of systematic deception is more common than people realize," she explained as we went through the evidence. "What makes your case unusual is the family relationship and the level of sophistication involved. Most catfishing operations are run by strangers targeting random victims. The fact that your sister had access to detailed personal information about you allowed her to create much more convincing personas. What kind of charges could she face? Based on what you've shown me, we're looking at identity theft, wire fraud, and potentially organized criminal activity if we can prove she was working with accomplices beyond the actress incident. The financial component makes this particularly serious. She's not just stealing your identity for emotional gratification. She's using it to obtain money and valuable goods." Detective Martinez explained that they would need to contact Rachel's victims to gather statements and financial records. Some of the men who had been sending her money might need to testify about the nature of their relationships and the circumstances under which they had provided financial support. "This is going to be embarrassing for them," I said. "These men thought they were in genuine relationships. Having to admit they were deceived by someone pretending to be me, it's going to be humiliating." Unfortunately, that's often how these cases work. The victim's embarrassment sometimes makes them reluctant to cooperate with prosecution. But the evidence you've provided is strong enough that we can probably build a case even if some victims choose not to participate. As I was leaving the police station, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan.
Rachel just called me. She wants to meet to explain everything and make things right. Should I talk to her? I called him immediately. Do not meet with her alone. If she wants to confess or apologize, she can do it through a lawyer or with law enforcement present. She might be manipulating you into not cooperating with the investigation. She sounded really distraught. She kept saying this was all a misunderstanding and that she never meant to hurt anyone. Nathan, I just spent 2 hours at the police station filing a report. They found evidence of systematic fraud involving dozens of victims across multiple cities. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's organized criminal activity. Jesus, how many people has she been doing this to? We don't know yet. The detective is going to contact the other men who were sending her money, but there might be victims we haven't identified yet. She's been running this operation for months, possibly longer.
That evening, I received a call from Madison, the actress who had impersonated me at the wine bar. She sounded nervous and apologetic. "I hope you don't mind that I got your number from Nathan," she said. "I need to talk to you about what happened last night. I think Rachel lied to me about what I was agreeing to do." "What did she tell you exactly?" "She said she'd been dating someone online using some old photos that didn't represent how she looked now, and that she needed help ending the relationship gracefully. She told me she was too embarrassed to meet the guy herself and explained that she'd gained weight and changed her appearance since the photos were taken." "So you thought you were helping her end a relationship with someone she'd actually been dating?" "Yes. She showed me screenshots of their conversations and said they'd been talking for a few weeks. She made it sound like a typical online dating situation that had gotten complicated because of misleading photos." "Madison, those weren't Rachel's conversations. She was impersonating me using my photos and my personal information. You were unknowingly helping her commit identity theft." There was a long silence. "Oh my God, I had no idea. She told me your name was Brooklyn, but she said that was the name she'd been using online because she thought it sounded more professional than Rachel. How much did she pay you?" $200 for the evening plus dinner. She said it was worth it to her to avoid an embarrassing confrontation." "Madison, I need you to contact Detective Sarah Martinez at the Austin Police Department. They're investigating Rachel's activities, and your testimony about what she asked you to do could be important evidence." "Will I get in trouble? I honestly thought I was just helping a friend out of an awkward dating situation." "You were deceived too. The detective will understand that you didn't know what was really happening."
If you press charges against me, our family will never recover from this. It was classic manipulation, threatening family consequences to avoid personal accountability, but I'd already accepted that our relationship was irreparably damaged. The sister I thought I knew had either never existed or had been replaced by someone capable of systematic deception and exploitation. Our family relationship was destroyed the moment you decided to steal my identity for your psychological experiments, I said. The criminal charges are just the legal consequence of choices you made repeatedly over months. I'll never forgive you for this. I don't need your forgiveness, Rachel. I need you to stop victimizing innocent people. She hung up, and I realized that would probably be our last conversation as sisters. Whatever relationship we'd had was ending not with reconciliation or understanding, but with threats and manipulation that revealed the true depth of her psychological damage. The investigation was just beginning, but I already knew that the fallout would extend far beyond criminal charges. Rachel had created a network of victims who would need to rebuild their ability to trust, a family crisis that would require years to heal, and questions about her mental health that might never be fully answered. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally protecting both myself and the innocent people she'd been manipulating. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive behavior, even when that person is your sister. 6 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom watching my sister plead guilty to 14 counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and obtaining money under false pretenses. She looked smaller somehow wearing a conservative navy dress our mother had bought specifically for court appearances.
The confident, manipulative person who had justified stealing my life had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely shocked that her actions had legal consequences. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case. Detective Martinez and her team had identified 63 victims across Texas, with documented financial losses totaling over $47,000. But the emotional damage was incalculable. Grown men who had stopped believing in love, who questioned every future relationship, who felt humiliated that they'd been so thoroughly deceived. Nathan testified about the psychological impact of believing he'd found genuine connection only to discover he'd been manipulated by an elaborate fiction. His voice broke when he described how the experience had affected his ability to trust new people. "I keep wondering what was real and what was scripted," he told the judge. "It's made me question my own judgment about everything." Marcus, the man who had been planning to propose, submitted a written statement because he couldn't emotionally handle appearing in court. His letter described months of therapy to deal with what his counselor had diagnosed as a form of trauma. "I didn't just lose a relationship. I lost my faith in my ability to read people and situations. I feel like I'll never trust my own feelings again." The defense attorney tried to portray Rachel as someone struggling with mental health issues who had made poor decisions during a period of instability. They emphasized her lack of prior criminal record and her family support, painting her as a young woman who had lost her way rather than a calculated predator. But when Rachel finally spoke during the sentencing hearing, her words revealed that she still didn't fully understand the impact of her actions. "I know what I did was wrong," she said, reading from a prepared statement. "I let my insecurities and loneliness lead me to make terrible choices. I never intended to hurt anyone, and I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." The apology sounded rehearsed and hollow. Even now, facing criminal conviction, Rachel was framing her behavior as the result of personal struggles rather than acknowledging the deliberate harm she'd inflicted on dozens of people. Judge Patricia Henley wasn't impressed by the defense's arguments or Rachel's apology. "Ms. Sinclair, you conducted a sophisticated criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable people seeking genuine human connection. You didn't just steal money, you exploited the basic human need for love and companionship. The psychological harm you have caused will affect your victims for years to come." Rachel was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to her victims and to undergo mandatory psychological counseling. The judge specifically prohibited her from using any social media platforms or dating applications during her probation period. As the bailiff led Rachel away in handcuffs, she looked back at our parents who were crying in the gallery. "She didn't look at me. We hadn't spoken since that final phone call 6 weeks earlier, and I suspect we never would again." The aftermath of Rachel's arrest had torn our family apart in ways I hadn't anticipated. Our parents had initially blamed me for destroying Rachel's life by involving law enforcement. They couldn't understand why I hadn't handled the situation privately, why I couldn't forgive family mistakes, why I'd chosen strangers over my own sister.
It took weeks of family therapy sessions, guided by a counselor who specialized in criminal behavior within families, before my parents began to understand the severity of what Rachel had done. The therapist helped them see that enabling Rachel's behavior would only have allowed her to continue victimizing others. Supporting someone doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions, Dr. Rebecca Chen had explained during one particularly difficult session. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to face the full weight of their choices. My parents eventually came to understand that Rachel's behavior represented a pattern of manipulation and exploitation that extended far beyond her treatment of me. They began to recognize moments from her childhood and adolescence where she'd shown similar tendencies, lying to get out of trouble, manipulating situations to her advantage, showing little empathy for people she'd hurt. The family healing process was complicated by the media attention the case received. Rachel's sophisticated catfishing operation became a cautionary tale covered by local news stations and true crime podcasts. The story of a sister stealing her sibling's identity for romance fraud captured public attention in ways that made our private family crisis uncomfortably public. I had to change my phone number after reporters started calling for interviews. I deleted my social media accounts and switched to using my middle name professionally to avoid being immediately connected to the case. The violation of having my identity stolen by Rachel was compounded by having my privacy invaded by journalists who wanted to sensationalize our family's destruction. Nathan and I developed an unexpected friendship through the shared trauma of being Rachel's victims. We met for coffee occasionally to process what had happened and support each other through the ongoing legal proceedings. He'd started dating again but admitted it was difficult. I find myself analyzing every conversation, looking for signs that someone might not be who they claim to be, he told me during one of our meetings. I know most people aren't like Rachel, but the experience has made me hypervigilant in ways that make it hard to be vulnerable with new people. Madison, the actress who had unknowingly helped Rachel impersonate me, had struggled with her own guilt and trauma. Even though she'd been deceived about her role in the scheme, she felt responsible for participating in my victimization. She'd started volunteering with organizations that help identity theft victims, trying to make amends for her unwitting participation in Rachel's crimes. The other victims had formed an informal support group, connecting through the victim services program to share their experiences and recovery strategies. Many of them had required extensive therapy to rebuild their ability to trust romantic partners. Some had given up on dating entirely, too damaged by Rachel's manipulation to risk being vulnerable again. Dr. Chen had explained that Rachel's behavior fit the pattern of someone with narcissistic personality disorder combined with antisocial tendencies. People with these traits often see others as objects to be manipulated rather than individuals with their own feelings and needs, she'd said. Rachel didn't see her victims as real people deserving of honest treatment, she saw them as sources of validation and financial support. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court had revealed that Rachel showed little genuine remorse for her actions and continued to minimize the harm she'd caused. The prison psychologist recommended intensive therapy focused on developing empathy and understanding the impact of her behavior on others. I'd initially hoped that facing criminal consequences might force Rachel to confront her psychological issues and begin genuine recovery. But reports from her counseling sessions suggested she was primarily focused on serving her time and meeting the requirements for early release rather than addressing the underlying problems that had led to her criminal behavior. 3 months after Rachel's sentencing, I received a letter from her in prison. It was the first communication we'd had since her arrest, and I debated whether to read it or simply throw it away. The letter was brief and manipulative, exactly what I'd expected. Dear Brooklyn, I hope you're satisfied with how everything turned out. I'm in prison because you couldn't forgive your sister for making mistakes. I've lost everything, my freedom, my family, my future, because you chose to side with strangers instead of the person who's been part of your life since birth. I hope you can live with the knowledge that you destroyed our family over something that could have been handled privately. When I get out, don't expect me to welcome you back into my life. Some things can't be forgiven. Even from prison, Rachel was still trying to manipulate me with guilt and threats. She was still portraying herself as the victim and me as the villain, who had overreacted to harmless mistakes. The letter confirmed that her time in prison hadn't led to any genuine self-reflection or acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused. I showed the letter to Dr. Chen during my next therapy session. This is exactly what I'd expect from someone with Rachel's psychological profile, she said. She's still externally focused, blaming others for consequences that resulted directly from her own choices. She hasn't internalized responsibility for her actions. Will she ever change? It's possible, but unlikely without significant intervention and a genuine desire to change. People with narcissistic and antisocial traits often lack the self-awareness necessary for meaningful psychological growth. They're more likely to learn to hide their manipulative behavior better than to actually develop empathy or emotional honesty. A year later, I moved to Denver for a new job and a fresh start. Austin held too many painful memories, and I needed geographical distance from the life Rachel had contaminated. I'd rebuilt my social media presence carefully, with enhanced privacy settings and constant vigilance for any signs that someone might be impersonating me again. The experience had changed me in fundamental ways. I was more cautious about sharing personal information, more suspicious of people's motives, more protective of my privacy and emotional boundaries. But I'd also developed a deeper appreciation for genuine relationships and authentic human connection. I'd learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and exploitation, skills that had proven valuable in both personal and professional relationships. The trauma of being victimized by my own sister had taught me to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, even if I couldn't immediately identify what was bothering me. Nathan and I stayed in touch through occasional emails and holiday cards. He'd eventually found love with someone who understood his history and supported his healing process. Several of Rachel's other victims had also rebuilt their lives and learned to trust again, Though the process had taken years of therapy and patience, Rachel was released from prison after serving 14 months, with the remainder of her sentence commuted for good behavior. I heard through family contacts that she'd moved to California and was working in retail while living in a halfway house. The terms of her probation prevented her from using dating apps or social media, but I wondered whether she was finding other ways to manipulate and exploit people. The family relationships had never fully healed. My parents and I maintained contact, but our interactions were strained by the permanent division Rachel's actions had created. They'd chosen to maintain a relationship with her after her release, which I understood but couldn't participate in. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome, even within families. Looking back, I realized that Rachel's catfishing operation had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between forgiveness and enabling, between family loyalty and personal safety, between supporting someone and protecting their victims. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to shield them from the consequences of their destructive choices. The scars from having my identity stolen by my own sister would probably never fully fade. But I'd learned to live with the knowledge that people are capable of betrayals that seem impossible until they happen, and that protecting yourself and others sometimes requires making decisions that feel like abandoning family. Rachel had destroyed our sisterly relationship in pursuit of a fantasy life that could never have been sustainable. In the end, her efforts to become me had cost her everything real she'd ever had: her freedom, her family, her integrity, and any possibility of the genuine love and connection she'd been seeking through deception and manipulation. The most tragic part wasn't that she'd been caught and punished, but that she'd never learned to value what was authentic about herself enough to build a life based on truth rather than elaborate fiction. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.